So let's understand what that entrepreneurial mindset is like and some of the shifts you may have to consider working your way through. There's a lot of quotes like this out there. 90% of startups don't survive, and 5 out of 10 startups. It's always a number. There's always this number that people throw out about startups not surviving or new businesses not surviving. But it's not as simple as this. This isn't really what happens. Generally, the more accepted number would be that 50% of startups don't survive beyond 10 years. And that could be for many different reasons. In fact, some of those reasons are if they get acquired by another business. So yes, they didn't survive in their current form, but they've gone into another form as part of another business. Or the owner has sold the business to someone else. So therefore that business stops and it becomes someone else's business. There's too many things that can really account for that. But a lot of the scare tactics that go on are just from people who have heard some number in the past, have added what they think it might be, some memory of it, and go, oh, yeah, this is what we're going to do. We're going to tell you that 90% of startups don't survive. And it's actually not true. What it might be is that 90% of startups in the investment field may not get funded and may not succeed, but that's not the same as business. A startup and new business, different things. A startup is a very high value, fast growing, rapidly growing entity that needs investment from outsiders in order to reach its very, very big goals. So you're thinking of, Amazon, you're thinking of most apps, you're thinking of most of the modern tech startups that we've worked with in the past that you've used. Any of those, that's a startup. A new business is not a startup. A new business is buying a food truck and opening a food truck. Starting your own accounting firm if you're an accounting person, starting a digital marketing business if you are someone who understands technology and digital marketing. Those kind of businesses are much more likely to succeed than the startup. The startup is very high value, but also high risk. The regular business, a lot lower risk, but also a lot lower value over time. They're usually run by sole traders or families or people who formed a small company that just sort of does that, and they make enough money to sort of make money through their lives. Buying themselves a job is what most entrepreneurs do. But we seem to think that the success or failure is all around how we execute. If we follow certain rules, do specific things, and that comes from an accounting mindset where there is specific accounting things you need to do at a 30% margin, do this, pay this, do these things. The reality is, though, that you can do all those things and still fail because the success is fundamentally tied to your way of thinking, not just the way that you happen to build. So your core objective is to really take yourself from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And we do talk about mindset. It's just a way of thinking about things. It's a way of framing things that are happening, handling failure, all that sort of thing. And we'll cover some of that before we go at the end of this. The fixed mindset is all about the world has scarce resources. There's not enough money to go around, all those sort of things. The growth mindset says, yes, there are scarce resources, but we've found an opportunity. Yes, there is not enough money around, but we know where to find where the money is. It's shifting that around from going, no, it's not possible to, this might actually be possible. So the myth is that the entrepreneurial mindset is something you're born with. It's something that you'll have because your parents were entrepreneurs, which is not always the case. In fact, so many cases I've seen entrepreneurs who, especially in migrant communities, will produce children who are not entrepreneurial in the slightest and have no interest in taking on the business because they're being put through education to become lawyers and doctors and engineers rather than business owners and entrepreneurs. The idea being that we want to create a better opportunities for our kids in the future, and they shouldn't have to run a shop because they can be lawyers and doctors. So you see a lot of that just not playing out, where just because your parents were an entrepreneur, it means that you're going to be an entrepreneur. My parents are 100% not entrepreneurial, never have been, never run a business, never done anything outside of having full-time work. I have grown up with a very entrepreneurial trait where I've always had this sort of, a mindset of this growth and finding abundance where other people find, lacks of opportunity, or, realizing that money spent is not always wasted, but it's sometimes an investment in things. And that's something that I've grown up with. So you don't get born as the entrepreneur. it's something you eventually take on. The truth is that risk is a matter of how you perceive it. So, what someone might see as a horrible risk, they could lose everything, someone will see as a massive opportunity that no one else seems to be taking. Failure might be seen as the greatest shameful thing ever. Oh my goodness, I failed to launch this business. Oh my goodness, I failed to get this particular contract. Whereas someone like me starts something new every month, and most of those things fail. Like 12, 11 out of 12 a year will fail. And I'm okay with that because I look at it as, okay, well, that's one less thing I have to do this year. Or it gives me learnings that I go, oh, that didn't work, but one part of this did, and I'm going to do more with that. Resources are often seen as something we don't have enough of, but quite often it's how we allocate the resources we have. So the abundance mindset, the entrepreneur mindset, looks at resources as things that are allocated in very liquid, very movable ways, where the employee mindset is usually we don't have enough resources, therefore we cannot do anything. And then there's also the lack of certainty, or we call it ambiguity. It might work, it might not. There might be things that happen that cause it not to work. There might be things that happen that cause it to work. An employee will tend to look at these things as black and white, as yes, no. Whereas the entrepreneur will look at it and go, how do I navigate my way through this? So I look at things like the current energy crisis in the world, the cost of living crisis. I own a number of businesses, cafes, menswear stores, barbershops, training company, all that sort of stuff. And I go, well, every one of those can be very, very dramatically impacted, particularly the cafes and menswear stores, by a cost of living crisis that's also accompanying a fuel supply crisis. So I look at that and go, well, that's interesting. I'm not panicking. I'm just going, well, how do I navigate my way through this? How do I prepare for this? Given that 30% of the products I sell in one of my cafes are shipped in from very remote areas that are not close to where the cafes are located. So, how do I navigate through this? Do I find more localized suppliers to reduce the fuel costs and the potential disruptions? Or do I remove certain items from the menu until we get through this crisis? So, we look at this as an opportunity to change things up, to review what we're doing rather than, oh, shut it down, panic. It's a very specific psychological operating system you're running in. You're running in a very specific way that questions everything, sees opportunities in everything, but also sees risk as a stepping stone to take rather than something to avoid. So it's not a personality type. You're not born with it, but it's something which you develop over time. The first place that we need to really address with the entrepreneurial mindset is the scarcity trap, that there's not enough time, there's not enough capital, there's not enough resources. And scarcity based leaders, often who are managers, accountants, they tend to be paralyzed by what they lack because they're working in spreadsheets, they're working in, in things which actually tell you right in front of you that there's not enough coming in and there's too much going out. So that's what their job is. There's nothing that's wrong with them. It's actually exactly what their job is to monitor that kind of stuff. The entrepreneur then looks at that and goes, what can I do with that? They don't say there's not enough coming in, not enough going, there's too much going out. They look at, okay, what can I do with that? What are the adjustments? How can I spin different dials to change that situation? They'll see it as an opportunity to go, well, let's bring more in. Okay, rather than just spending more, let's bring more in to be able to account for that. Where the usual reaction to, say, an employee will be, let's cut costs, cut programs, cut all those things. The abundance mindset, on the other hand, looks at success and resources and opportunities as completely infinite. There's so many out there, and they're only getting more and more and more all the time, and anyone can attain them, but they have to have an appetite for a little bit of risk because sometimes these things are not going to work. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. And I guess in my case, it's holding onto physical things very lightly, like property and belongings and the things of life, cars and caravans and jet skis and all those sort of things, holding onto them very lightly, knowing that at any time you might need to get rid of those. So it's looking at success as something that is achievable, resources as something that there are many of, and increasingly more over time. So we look at that with the introduction of the internet in the mid-90s, where suddenly we went from a very fixed kind of basis for all our economies to suddenly everything was disrupted and there was infinite possibilities out there. So the language of abundance tends to be a little different. where somebody who is working in a financial area would say, well, these are costs. The entrepreneur tends to go, these are investments. So, for instance, I went on a trip to Melbourne, Canberra, and Brisbane recently, and it cost me roughly around $4,000 to be able to conduct meetings, to get there, to accommodate myself there, feed myself there, get around, transportation, flights, all that thing. About $4,500. So it wasn't cheap. It was actually an expensive trip to take for 10 days, but I was only paid out of that $1,500. So the regular employee limitation mindset would say that's a loss. There was a negative return on investment from that. I look at it and go, that's an investment in the next part of work that I'll get that will lead me to those places. So look at it. What was the investment in Victoria, in Melbourne? It was investing in a series of workshops I'll be running later this year. The investment in Canberra was to check out real estate to see if there was any commercial real estate in which I may be able to expand my training business. If that doesn't work, that's okay. But I do know that in Melbourne, I have actually made enough forward bookings in Melbourne to more than pay for the trip to Melbourne. Canberra will be a loss. Brisbane was a great win because I've actually picked up two pieces of work I'm doing in the future because I met that person in Brisbane. Overall, $4,500 worth of expenditure, made nothing, $1,500 really from the actual process of being there in cash, receipts as a direct, on the ground during that period. But the lifetime value, so I'm not talking about the value I got out of that trip, it's the lifetime value because I took that trip, is going to be around about $30,000, which is a lot more than $4,500. That's when you look at the costs you're making as investments. And then you start looking at competitors differently too. Most of us look at competitors and think, oh, they're bad. We have to outcompete them. We have to shut them down. I look at competitors as who are doing the same thing as I'm doing as an inspiration. I look at them as, oh, okay, they're doing that. What can I do to respond to that? Or if they're putting their prices down, how do I compete with them at a higher price? So you look for, as a reaction to what they're doing, you find your new way forward. And then transactions, we talk about money in, money out. We look at transformation. So that money out transformed my presence in Melbourne to something which now has become a good source of business. Catching up for a coffee with 5 people here in Darwin will cost me about $50, but the transaction of $50 actually transforms each one of those people I attended with into potential customers, which then in 3 or 6 months turns into $10,000, $20,000 worth of work, which isn't too bad for a $50 coffee meetup. So when you look at that, things become much more about investing in the future. Another area of mindset change is understanding what you can control and what you can't control. And I also I focus a lot on the things I can control: my decisions, my attitude, my preparation, the effort that I put in, the energy I put in. They're all things that I can control. But the things I cannot control are the state of the economy, luck, just the luck of being in the right place at the right time. To a degree, I do control that a little by being in lots of places. So I have more chances of being in the right place at the right time. But luck, as in something just comes to you through no effort of your own, you have no control over that. And the government, changes to the government, changes to funding opportunities. Those are things I have no control over. So I don't really concern myself massively with them. What I will look at is the current fuel supply crisis, the current cost of living crisis within Australia, the current housing crisis, and look at those. I cannot do anything about those, but what I can do is look at how they affect the things that I can control, like what decisions I make. So if I look at decisions, I go, it is much better for me to purchase airline tickets in bulk right now for the rest of the year, whilst the jet fuel price is somewhat under control, rather than maybe 1 month's time when we're facing potential jet fuel shortages and rationing, and the cost of airfares will rise incredibly. So I'm spending a lot more on those things in preparation, knowing that will save me a lot of money. I can't control the pricing in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months' time. I can control my costs by buying now. So those little differences you think about when you take on your own business. There's also a locus of control. So that idea, what I can control, what I can't control. This is the degree which we believe we govern the outcomes of our own lives. And this is something where the entrepreneur is very much an individualist who says, I do govern the outcomes of my own life. And it's not, my life is not upended by external forces. You see people in war zones who thrive rather than fall apart to pieces. They seem to find a way to make the best of a terrible situation and will often thrive out of those things. The external stuff is where we may try to attribute the success that we've had or the failure we've had to things we can't control, which is just madness because that's not your failure if you don't have any control over it. The failure may be where you take control of that, and that's what we call the internal locus, where we overwhelmingly believe that our decisions and our preparation and our hard work, they are the things that drive what our outcomes are going to be. And that's a very a very positive mindset kind of thing that people will take on, but don't really believe when they go, oh, I lost my job because of the economy. I go, well, there's other people in your company in your same work who didn't lose their job. So how much of that was due to the economy and how much it was due to a lack of your own decision making, your own preparation, your own efforts and hard work? So that's how we spin it around. Another area that's really important when it comes to the entrepreneur is understanding the impact and redefining or reframing how you look at failure. Failure is always pointed as something bad. It's shameful. It's something which is never to be talked about or shared. Yet stories of failure are some of the most powerful stories of learning, developing, and growing into success. In fact, you cannot have success unless you have failure first, especially if you're trying to make that success yourself. If you're inheriting all of your wealth and all your success from other people before you, that's great. Then this is probably, you're going to actually really struggle with failure one day because you've never seen what failure looks like in your life. You don't know how to fail. You've always been a smart kid at high school and you always, were top of sports teams, top of maths, top of language, top of arts and culture, top of economics, top of science, then you don't understand what failure is. You think that failure is getting a B grade when you only want to get an A grade. I've got some news for you. You're going to hit a very big world that's going to cause you to fail. And you'll fail because you're just not as good as people who've been doing this for 20 years ahead of you. So I want you to think about how you approach failure and how much you see shame in failure, how much you get pressure from people in family, friends circles when there's failure in your life. And I want you to go, well, what if your resume or your CV listed every single mistake you ever made? Not all your successes. Oh, I got this job and I did this sort of job and then I moved on to a better job and did this. What if you could list all the things where you went backwards? I've got a portfolio career, as most people who are Gen Z will end up having as well. Lots of different jobs where you move around. You don't stick with one thing or one career forever. You kind of jump around a bit, right? We call that a portfolio career. That's what the CV I'm talking about is. It shows the portfolio career. You did this job, then you went to the next job. It didn't work out. So you list that as well. That was a failure. And you're very honest about it. Entrepreneurs need to be very honest about their failures because that creates trust in the people who will work with them, but it also gives you a bit of resilience, strength. You understand that going to the gym builds muscles because you are breaking your muscles. You're literally breaking them when you lift heavy things. It breaks all the blood vessels, it breaks the muscle fibers so that when they heal again, they get bigger. They fill with more blood, they have a greater capacity, they come back stronger. That's how muscles work. Exactly how human beings and our mindset works when we understand that failure is just the beginning and it's a necessary part of growing into success. And you will fail, I guarantee it. The growth mindset response is that failures are not setbacks, they're stepping stones to your long-term innovation, your long-term success. You have to go through this rite of passage of failing at something. Those who never fail will inevitably not cope. They'll fall down, they'll have a mental breakdown if one day when they're 45 years old, they finally fail, or their wife leaves them, or their children hate them or something like that. They won't be able to cope with those failures because they're not used to failing. With failure, It's really just all about stripping out the emotion. That thing where it tells you that I've defeated, I'm personally a failure. This is a permanent state of failure. I'm never going to recover from this. You need to strip all that away and just go and look at it as data. Failure is data. It allows you, when you look at it as data, say, for instance, if I didn't have enough money to run this and that's for I have failed at it, you go, well, what do I need to do next time? I need to have a greater runway of money before I go into that business. Or I need to learn how to be better at sales so that I can bring in more money into that business while it's in that early stage of growing. Data is what failure is, not defeat. So the failure resume would be make sure you look at the mistakes you've made, the things that have just not led to great outcomes for you, and record them. I'm not talking about recording on video, writing them down into a list, a burn book, if you like, a list of everything you've failed at, right? And then what you do is dismantle the need to be perfect at things because success doesn't come in a straight line. It's like a wandering, zigzagging path through a very, a forest full of, trees and rocks and animals that you want to avoid. It's not something which you go straight into. Success is not a linear thing when you're working as an entrepreneur. There's a lot of try this, that failed. Okay, let's try this. Oh, that failed too. Try this. Oh, that was a little bit successful. Let's do more of that until it fails. The more you do it, the better you become at it. To the point where I'm now starting things every month, trying them, releasing them. And if they work, great. If they don't, that's great too. I just move on to the next thing or take what I learned from the failure and apply it to the next thing. If you want to look at more advanced mental models around this of how to prepare you more for this, there's what we call the pre-mortem. So it's an activity you will do where you look at something you're planning to do and you predict how it will go in your life if you fail. So you're not saying, oh, this will fail, I'm going to plan for failure. What you're doing is practicing the mental model that says, okay, this new business I'm starting as a digital marketing agency, I want to see how I would feel if this fails. So let me think about that. What does it mean to me if that fails? And you'll be able to then start to see, by practicing that, that's not so bad, really, is it? Maybe I can use that as an example to move on to the next thing. And then there's another one called gap and the gain, where you look at when you looked at the end product of success or of failure, look for where you believe the gaps would have been and where the gains would have been. So you're measuring where the gains and gaps were in a failure or in a success so that you've already mentally practiced that out. So you go, okay, so if the failure had come because of lack of money, what can I do? What's the gap there? I need to get more money. Great. How do I get more money? So you're already preparing for when those things may pop up. You'll already have a plan in your head about how to deal with it. That's not just a plan that helps you to plug the gap. It's also a plan that helps you to be mentally resilient when that comes. So you don't look at that challenge as a panicking failure. You look at it as something, okay, I've already practiced this in my head. I know what to do. I know what to do here. What would I do if I was advising someone else to do this? Go and do that thing. The pre-mortem protocol is before launch, you have an open discussion with others, with the people in your business, with friends, family about, what could happen. So this is also where you are creating your little safety net, your potential, board of directors around you, your family, your friends, people who you trust. And it creates a bit of a shock absorber. So if things do go wrong, you've got people in your life who understand what it is because they were there beside you before you got started and before you spent money. It gives you a bit of psychological safety to discuss what could go wrong before you actually start spending money on it and things do go wrong. And that gap and gain is measuring against this unattainable moving target is the gap thinking. That you're going, okay, well, I've got to make $1 billion and $1 billion moves around a lot. It's not like a goal. It's actually a moving goal. It's constantly changing. The $1 billion might be attainable in one currency, but not another. In one industry and not another. You might require 35 employees before you can get to that $1 billion target. Whereas gain thinking looks at measuring the progress backwards. Compare now to where you started. So for instance, if you haven't started a business yet, you measure back to when you first thought about this. You go, okay, what have I done since then? You go, nothing. Okay, I need to start doing something in order to gain. The takeaway really on all this is that the entrepreneurial mindset is a daily develop or practice, like meditation. You don't get good at meditation by just sitting down one day and doing it. You have to do it kind of all the time. And you only get massive breakthroughs in this by the compound effort of being patient, being consistent, and daily practicing these different mindsets. Some of that can be looking at stories of other founders and other entrepreneurs who have failed and understanding how they changed their life after that, or looking at stories of success. What did the success have? What did they have to do in order to get that success? What were their routines? And your routines could be something as simple as getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning, going to the gym, then making your breakfast when you get home, having a shower, brushing your teeth, and going to the office and locking everything out until you've read your emails, and then finally having your meetings, having a very specific routine, meditation before bed, meditation before you get out of bed, any of those things that you do, which are your daily patient efforts to develop a stronger mindset through that. I'd like you to continue the learning. I've got a QR code here that'll lend you through to my interactive guide around the entrepreneurial mindset. So you can go to either the address at the bottom of the screen there, or you can just get onto that QR code and that will take you there as well.